Skip. All right, we are recording now. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay. Well, should I read what's on the screen? It says, Joe, you're a trip. Fix your hair first.
Joe, you're a trip.
He was being
Great.
he was like doing this when he heard that we were recording. So I was like, that's so funny.
From one vein spouse to another. Greg called me vain earlier.
Only says that because he loves you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, well, I think most of us know Greg and Theresa, but for anybody who doesn't, they are elders in the Denver Church of Christ. They've been shepherding our church for the past couple of years, which we've been so grateful for. They have 3 beautiful daughters of their own that are grown and 4 little cutie pie grandchildren.
Wow.
One just born. So we're just really excited that you guys are here. And I know I'm looking forward to just hearing from you and just your wisdom and your experience for our family. So thank you so much for taking your time to spend with us.
No, you're very
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you for asking us. It's an honor.
It sure is. So what we want to do tonight is we have 3 passages we're going to look at briefly. And then I think what we're planning on doing is then opening it up and let people ask questions or what they want to talk about, the topics we brought up, that's fine. If they've got some others, that's fine too. So it's kind of that basic 10-minute little devotional and then open it up to let you guys share and ask your questions. Does that sound kind of what you were expecting as a format?
Sounds great.
Great. Okay, super. So, we want to use 3 pretty familiar scriptures, I think it is for most of us, when it comes to raising our children, because I think it's sometimes these can be scriptures that people, I don't know, maybe sometimes they're so familiar we miss some of the gems that are in there. So I'm going to start off, and then Teresa's going to share a passage, and I'm going to share another one. We'll jump back and forth too as we go through this. My passage is the familiar one in Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's starting in verse 4. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love," I'm reading out of the English Standard Version. It's a little bit different. Again, verse 4. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as a frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." Again, this is a pretty familiar passage to a lot of us, but I think there's some real gems in this passage. And as Teresa and I reflected upon raising our girls during this age group that we're talking about tonight, some things came out really clear. I think one of the things that is important is this passage is talking about, of course, one of the basic commandments about loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We've heard that before many times. But he's talking about doing this in such a way that it's a conviction. And I think that's really important, that we're sharing our convictions with our children, not just some rules or not just here's what we do and here's what we don't do. And I'm not saying you don't have those kind of conversations, but the point is if all this doesn't come out of a conviction that you have in your life, then I'm afraid our children are going to pick these up as just kind of your rules that you live by, and why can't we live by some other rule in time during some point in their life when they get older. But as they share these convictions, I think it's really interesting because he's talking about sharing about these things throughout the day. And it's easy, I know we're busy and we have a lot of things we're dealing with, probably more so now than ever, but it's easy to want to relegate all of this to, well, we're going to talk about this only the last 10 minutes before you go to bed or something, or we have a family devotional and that's the only time we talk about things. And this is really talking about sharing about your convictions really kind of out of the overflow of your heart.
Mhm.
And so therefore he's talking about doing it when you get up, when you go along the way, kind of throughout your day. And I think one of the important things that we should all be striving to do, even when our children are young and little, is to help them understand or have you be sharing about God as he is, your friend, someone that you are talking about and thinking about throughout the day and not just a certain time. And I think one of the things that I think this is so important because it's easy to relegate all of this to kind of like, if we do A and B and C, then therefore things will be okay. We want to relegate God's commands to kind of like as we would say, making a cake. I'll do this step and this step and this step, and voila, out comes the cake. And we think that's sometimes true of how we develop convictions with our children. If we'll just do this and this and this, and make sure they go to church, and make sure they don't watch certain kinds of shows, and they all watch these good kind of cartoons, it's all going to come out great. And that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about out of the overflow of your heart. And that God and his commandments are important to you. And that you're sharing about them throughout the day in different situations. And I think, a lot of times when our kids were little, there would be obviously times when it was more appropriate, or maybe they were more receptive to listening to what we were saying, maybe before going to bed. Or Theresa would oftentimes have really good talks with our daughters when they were in the car, and they would be able to have a better dynamic, if you will. But one of the things I think is really important in this passage is it teaches how to share about convictions, and not just rules and regulations, but about things that you have convictions about. And like any other conviction, if you share about it throughout the day, it's going to become more obvious to your children how important these things are to you, and hopefully then to them. So a great familiar passage. It's not talking about a bunch of rules and regulations. It's about talking about having a heart that you want to talk about your God in all types of situations. And so they learn that this is something you believe and you live out throughout your day.
One of the things that part of my degree in college was child development. And every generation has almost their own child psychology. And the psychology of the day of how to discipline your children, or how to do different things, and yet some things never change, like the way that a baby develops in the womb. Some things don't change, like what happens at this time when the brain's developing, and when does the brain develop more highly at times, when are they going through a growth time or a brain growth time. Learning how to walk. Some of these things are science, and we've got it down. We understand those things. And yet some things aren't. We don't just get it down. It's we really have to understand there are teachable moments. And that was one of the terms that they used way a long time ago in the 70s, the teachable moments in children. And I don't remember a lot from those days in college, but I do remember that being the focus. And especially with the age group we're talking about tonight is really the preschool years before they go to school. And but there are those moments where our children are more teachable than at other times. And I think being a mother and father that are keen on that, and not being so self-aware that you're not aware of them, and that they have these moments that you can touch on, and it can make a major influence. And that little bitty person, you can still have a major influence. One of the things that my daughters have shared with me, I was the last one to get this, but it's this little Bible, Jesus Storybook Bible. And I don't know if any of you have seen this. You can get it on Amazon. It's by Zondervan. And it gives it's a narrative approach about the most amazing stories in the Bible. And one of my daughters actually had been encouraged to read it, not just to her son George, but for herself, so that she could really get just maybe a more picture of the narrative of who God is.
The
and
overview.
The overview.
Yeah.
And so she had talked to me about it, and I had seen it at her house, and I had used it with George. And then I found out my other two daughters had it too. And so they were reading it to the baby Finn, and Lauren had been using it with Hudson and Brooke. And I go, hey, why didn't you tell me about this? This is awesome. And so I have actually been reading this consistently, just in the narrative form, and how I thought, oh, I wish I could go back. I get chills talking about this, but I wish I could go back and capture those moments with my own children and have simplified things a lot more.
Yeah.
And if I was going to
Yeah.
do some things differently,
Yes.
as an old woman now, as a younger woman, I would have simplified things and not made it so complicated. And the girls would always say, oh, Mom, it's always about the character. You're always concerned about our character. And I'm like, yes, I know.
We are.
But,
That's right.
and that's a good thing. But I think sometimes I could extrapolate out, oh, if they do this, this is what's going to happen. And I would have worried less and just taught more at a simple level. One of the things the second thing we wanted to talk about is living the example. And, our topic is 3 things young parents should be doing to raise spiritual children. So I think living the example in Ephesians 4:29 through 32. And I'll go ahead and read that.
Right here, if you like.
Okay, I think mine was a little different.
Yes, it does.
Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you.
And then let me read the same passage out of the English Standard Version, a little different, but obviously it's very similar. It says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another. Be tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. A little bit different, but kind of some neat adjectives as well.
So I was just thinking specifically of the preschool age children. And I know some of you are here tonight and your kids are teenagers. Some of them are off to college. I think of the Carinos and the others. But, apologizing when you're angry with them and impatient, that is an excellent example.
Yeah.
You're not going to be perfect. We're going to do things that it says not to do. But we can do the right thing, and that is apologize and confess. And our children learn by that example. And have you ever, I know at one point, when you're with a child and you're like, why are they not quick to say, I'm sorry? Why is it like pulling teeth to get them to say they're sorry? And it's like, okay, we've got to keep emulating that, right? We have to keep being that example and teaching him that way, and really share with them, it's hard sometimes to admit, we did the wrong thing, but it's the best way. And so apologizing, 24/7 parenting is really what it's all about right now with this whole virus. And a lot of the parents have been saying things like they are exhausted and they are weary and they feel like it's all about them and their children. And in some respects it is. And, but I think it's probably more the way that it was a long time ago. And what will normal be? I'm not sure, but there are some things that we can make as normal right now. You can do it with your love. meeting their needs and filling time with good things as you're together. But things like irritations and anger and yelling and saying mean things to even our small children is a part of our sinful nature and has to be repented of, just like any other thing.
I think one of the things I'd like to add to this passage, or this comment in this passage, is what this scripture is calling us to do is to have these attitudes in our home. Is your home known to be a place where people can seek forgiveness? Is your home a place where there are no unwholesome words coming out of your mouth? I mean, I like the way this English Standard Version says, to let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth. Sarcasm. Is it your home a place of criticism, or is it a place of encouragement? I know this is really basic, but the point here is that even with smaller children, what is the environment of the home? I mean, and for many of us, we didn't grow up that way. So when we became disciples, we're having to relearn kind of everything. And even with our small children, are we promoting an atmosphere where these nurturing attitudes need to happen? We all want to have that as adults. Amen. I want to be forgiven, and I want to not be around people with corrupting talk. And sometimes I can choose where that happens, and sometimes I can't choose where that happens. But in your own home, especially with your little ones, do they see their home? Do they know their home is a place where these attitudes are being nurtured and encouraged? And as adults, we're being examples about that with our children.
One of my daughters shared with me that
this is good.
she actually shared, it was this morning, about it. It was a very good, I guess it was an article. And she did a little confession with the article. And she sent it to Greg and I and her sisters first thing this morning, but she talked about very vulnerably how annoyed she could get in the morning just starting off. And with her son George, and they live in England, and so their shutdown has been a little more extreme than any of ours. And she has found herself to be a little annoyed and not feeling like she's at her very best. And so she was really wanting to change this and work on it. And she said, the first thing I met with the minute George wakes up is, you need to change my diaper. He just turned 3, but he's very articulate. You need to change my diaper because I pooped. And then what can I watch something on TV? And plus they don't have a TV. They don't have regular TV. And I'm hungry, or later I want a snack, or later, will you wipe me? And so it's just a continual, and she said, I just find myself to feel like, oh my gosh. And I said, Callan, that's his world. It's about you meeting those basic needs. Remember, it's your preschooler's world. It's all about what you can do to help them in their lives. And you are their world. You make their world. And you mold their world, and with a heart to take on their world later. It'll require great patience and a controlled spirit, and having a humble mindset. These are really troubled times, and our children. This is one of the things that when I asked Jennifer, what were some of the things you'd like for us to touch on, this is something about just the troubled times that we're living in. And I hear it a lot from some of the women here in our own church here in Denver. And because they are on 24/7, there's just no break. And now, all 3 of my daughters are in that same way of living right now. George says, before he was 3, he says, we were in a video call, and he says, well, we can't go outside, but we can go outside for 1 hour because there's a virus out there. And that's all he understood, and that's his world. And he just knows how it affects him, but yet his biggest world is what his parents supply for him and provide. And so I think that we need to remember that,
Yeah.
is that you
Yeah.
really are their world.
Yeah.
Even though that virus is out there, their world is what you help make it.
That's right.
And that's awesome, because we can control some of that, can't we? We can't control what's going on out there. And then there's a questionnaire going on right now, and I know probably you've seen it with your own kids, where they ask them what the coronavirus is, and their answers are amazing on what they should do. And I have just gotten a full-on kick out of it. But I think of anything I've seen is that their world is really not about that and what's going on out there in that world. Their world is about what you help make
That's right.
their world.
That's right.
And thankfully, they're not teenagers, because they are more affected by what's going on out there, but not your little ones. And so I would embrace those moments with
Yeah.
them.
And then the last passage we'll look at as we close this portion of our time together is, again, another classic passage. A passage, and I'll just wrap it up here, is Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And it has to do, of course, with discipline, which obviously is always a hot topic or an important topic when you've got young children. Ephesians chapter 6, again, verse 1, I'm reading out of the English Standard Version. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and they may live long life in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. I think the NIV says, fathers, do not embitter your children. And this is another perspective of not provoking your children. And real briefly, I think it's really important that as we talk about this, that discipline is important. I mean, there are some people that don't think you should be disciplining your younger children. I think that's the Bible says just the opposite of that. But obviously, how you do that's very important. We just don't, make a rule and tell them this is the way it is. I think even with our younger children, we need to be defining for our children what is good and what's right. I think it's important, though, to just, as Theresa says, we have an early warning system. You let them know that they're going to be disciplined if they do this thing that's wrong, not just, respond to them in a disciplining way when they didn't even know, they didn't even understand that was something that wasn't right. Again, I think this is an area where we have to unlearn some things, especially if we've become disciples recently and we might have a bad experience with discipline when we were younger. We can't let that be the source or the way we interpret the scriptures. We need to really learn what the scriptures are saying about discipline, and giving your children an early warning system so they understand it, and then make sure that you carry out like you said you were going to. And then, of course, then you want to reassure them and make sure that they remember and understand that you love them, you're caring about them. We would also really try to explain to our children why we're doing this, what's the value. I think when he talks about, bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord, he's talking about you need to be teaching them, not just telling them what not to do and what to do, and you're going to get in trouble if you don't do that, but to instruct them and explain it to them, of course, at their level of understanding that they have. And that's going to be different. Even with each of your children at the same age, they may have a different level of understanding, a different level of maturity, but to take the time and the energy and the effort to explain it to them, what they can understand, so they can be instructed and learn to grow and mature. But again, it is going to be suited for each child based upon their ability to understand and their maturity level, even if they have special needs, to be making sure we address things that they can appreciate and they can understand. So discipline's crucial, very important. The Bible talks a lot about it. And we might have some questions about it later tonight, but it is one of those things where it's not just giving a rule, but explaining why that is important. And when that isn't carried out, appropriately disciplining them and making sure that part of that is that you reassure them and let them know that they are loved and cared for. So with that, we want to open it up and let people make comments, ask questions. Maybe we can expound on some of this some more, but we wanted to let people or clarify we want to give people a chance to do that. So thank you for letting us share these thoughts.
Thank you.
Mike, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Ryan.
Go ahead,
Oh,
young.
thanks. I just want to say thank you so much for what you shared.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you guys said, it's not like you've read these scriptures, but even what you were sharing tonight about even the article that your daughter shared and that patience. Our youngest, Lucy, she's gritty and she can do a lot on her own, but I can really relate to that because she is also very much like, Mommy, do this for me, Mommy, do that for me. And we're working full time from home. And so I can feel a little like, I can't. And so, but I did have a question for you guys and just wanted to get your thoughts on something. So Lucy is an incredibly independent kid. She knows what she likes. She goes right after it. But in that, she can, I'm just noticing like a deceitfulness in her. We caught her, she lied about something silly last week. And we talked through it, but she's definitely our strong-willed child. But I just wanted, I think, when you said worry less and teach more in simplicity, what comes to mind when you hear that regarding this kind of like underlying deceitfulness? It should just like go. Our oldest, it's very different. It's so funny how different they are because our oldest will ask for anything. She's very careful. I don't know about careful, but she's very considerate.
Very compliant.
Very compliant. Yeah, she doesn't ever want to be wrong or do wrong or, which is good, but I also, want her to be able to make mistakes here too. But anyway, so with our youngest, it's the complete opposite. She's good to go. She'll go and help herself to whatever she needs or do whatever she wants to do, even if it might be, crossing a line that she is very clear is she's not supposed to cross. How would you approach that, or how can we guide her heart and even for our hearts looking at this, and then how can we teach her simply in this area?
And how old is she?
4,
She's
going
4?
on 15.
Well, 15. Yes, we had one of those.
We had one.
We had one of those.
Now she
yes.
has a child just like that.
Yeah. We watch our daughters and with their children, we just smile
We
about
did, we
sweet
did.
justice. Yes, they get the deal for themselves. First of all, I think you're right to be concerned about the heart. This is a character issue, and it's, like you said, it's not just about whether they do the right thing or wrong thing. You're seeing a character trend. And I think because you see that, first of all, I appreciate that because I think so many times it is easy just to focus on the action that our children are doing instead of saying, what's the character? What's motivating this? Even the comment you made about your other daughter, that is it your daughter who's
Lucy? No, Lucy's the younger.
Yeah, Lucy's the younger.
your other daughter that's more compliant. Yeah, that could be good, but it's a character and we need to address the character. So first of all, I appreciate that. I think one thing I would be doing in this case, and again, bro, maybe some of this stuff may be coming from you, maybe, it depends upon who has maybe the more influence in your child's life at this stage of their life. But I think when you're talking about something like deceit or maybe lying or maybe shading the truth, there's a lot of different variations of this theme we've seen before. I think you do need to try to have some talks with trying to, where is this coming from? What are you feeling? Why do you have to do this? And not let her argue with you about, no, I wasn't doing that, or no, that wasn't what I meant. But just try to address what are you feeling? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
You're not in trouble, or we want you to be a person that can be making your own decisions, but at the same time, asking why. And again, this may be a situation where you have to have that discussion more than once, because they may not think about themselves like that. So I think with our children are young, they're not thinking that level, and I'm not asking you to be. I'm just saying it's good to start asking, where is this coming from, and why do you believe you need to act this way? It's wrong, so we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why. And so
Yeah.
that's one thing I would say, one perspective I would want to bring to the table, if you will. Anything else to that?
I think what's important, and maybe this will apply to, some other situations that maybe other parents are wondering about too, is I think it's always good is you deal with it in the moment.
Yes.
But then
Yes.
later.
Yeah, too. Follow up.
Yeah,
Follow up.
just
Yeah.
I call it revisiting
Yes,
it.
that's a good point.
And I let them know, hey,
Yep.
I'd like to
I'd like to
we're
talk
gonna-
about this
we're
again.
going to talk about it again, and maybe you'll have more. But if she's 4, she may be pretty articulate, and but
That's
we're
a good
going to
point.
just
Yeah.
revisit this.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this again later, because then it gives you an opportunity to kind of give them the heads up. Hey, we're going to talk about this, and then it's not in the heat of the moment. It's
Yes.
like in a marital
Yes.
fight.
Yeah.
We try to deal with it, but then, okay, we're going to table this, and we are going to come back to that later.
Yeah. And I think for those of you who have older children, I think that's a great approach. I can remember us doing this with our girls, when they were in high school. We may have to deal with something. It may take more than one discussion to get to the bottom of it, or maybe more than one discussion to really feel like we've covered it as completely as we think as mom and dad. Now, they may feel like we've talked about it enough and we're going, well, you're not the one making that decision. We're the mom and dad. We're making the decision how much we talk about. But I think that's a very good point. Maybe we all need to take a break and take a step back, because especially during these times, we're feeling a lot of stress. We're going through a lot of things, and our tempers may be short, but very good point there. I hope that's helpful to you. But I commend you for seeing this as a character issue and not just something kind of cute, or she's being independent or whatever. No, I look back at all of our daughters, and they did things at 3 that you could call cute, but at 13, it wasn't so cute anymore, and at 18, it certainly wasn't cute. So we nailed that thing at the beginning. As it began to continue, we continued to address it. So.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for
Thank
being-
you.
Other questions that people may have, or just thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, any feedback, be
Yeah.
helpful.
I mean, we got more questions. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just think this is good for teenagers too.
Oh, that's good, Fran. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I think, Fran,
universal truths, really.
they're universal truths. How you apply them could be very different.
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
I get that, but I think, you're right, sis. These are, God's word rings true no matter what age group. How we apply them and how it gets personalized is different, of course. But
Yeah. Anyway, thanks.
Hi, Jesse.
Hi,
Hey.
thank you so much. My question is just pertaining to how much is too much when explaining the coronavirus to kids of this age group. Because our son is 5, and he has 2 sisters, 7 and 10, and of course he hears a lot from them. And we do try to control, the amount of news that we have on around them. But they still know, and he asks a lot of questions, and he's expressed a lot of fear. So how do you, I don't know, any words of wisdom in terms of explaining everything that's going on?
let you start.
We have a almost 6-year-old grandson, and one thing that's wonderful about grandchildren is that you kind of get a redo. It's like everything you wish you would have done the first time better, you get to try it out again, and you get that second chance. And it's been so much fun watching even him at 5, and he's very articulate, but I think that it is there has to be those limitations, and they don't need to take on. Some children have this kind of a world concern very young, I have one of our daughters was like that, and it's kind of the big picture. And she, even at 4, and we did have to tailor things back as to what she was hearing. And she didn't need to take on the worries of this world. And her world really is still at 4 or hit, your 5-year-old, it's still pretty much your home. But they do understand how it affects their relationships, and just finding out how they feel about that. I mean, if your child has friends, I know one of the big things has been, what is the first thing you're going to do? I know that was one of the questions that was asked. I'm going to go spend time with my friends. And that's their world. That's what's important to them. And I think really developing that as what's really important are the relationships, rather than the death and decay that is going on at this time. So
Well,
that would be one suggestion.
let me ask you: what kind of young man is he? Is he vivacious, outgoing? Is he more reflective? And what is his character as you see it?
I think he's a combination of all those things. I think he's very inquisitive. He asks a lot of really good questions. I think very mature, because I think he gets a lot of that from his sisters. He just knows a lot. And sometimes I'm really surprised. I'm like, you're only 5. How do you know all this? So
I think he's the kind that picks up on a lot of things very quickly,
Okay.
but sometimes doesn't necessarily know what it means. So he might say something a little off kilter and think it's probably the funniest thing in the world, but then you're just kind of like, okay, hold up, wait a minute. So,
Well, I think you do have, this may be one of those situations where, and you may have already done this, to have a discussion with your 2, I think you said your other children, the 2 older were daughters?
mhm, yeah.
Right. That your 2 older daughters, to the degree that they can, maybe you need to sit down and talk to them about not sharing everything with him, and maybe helping them be a shield to protect him in some way. They can help in that, and not just say everything that they think. I do think some of these little fun quizzes that we were talking about are, it might be helpful for him to take it, and say, because they're just general questions to ask children what they think. And it might be very revealing to you, going, oh, he totally misunderstands what this is.
Yeah.
Or, oh, he knows this way better than I thought he did. We need to do some more teaching or clarifying. Because even as adults, we're confused about this stuff. I mean, you can watch 3 different channels on television and get 3 different versions of whatever's supposed to be the truth. So it is very confusing. Yeah. I was talking to one of our pharmacists a couple of days ago, and as a medical professional, she's confused about whether you should wear a cloth mask or not, and whether you should wear it outside. And I mean, it was interesting to me. Here's someone who's trained, and she was making the point that the amount of information we're getting is so much, and it's such a fluid situation, and it's such different depending upon where you live and what part of the country. It's just hard to know. So the point is, this is a difficult topic for anybody to get their little head around, especially a 5-year-old. But I would really encourage you to get some of those quizzes and give them to him and see what he does understand. And I think the idea of what you said about trying to protect him is a very good point, because so much of this stuff on TV is unfiltered, and it's not suitable because it doesn't try to take into consideration different people's level of understanding and maturity. They just kind of blurt it out. But I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to get some of those quizzes and see what they reveal to you about what he really understands.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you seen, there's another thing that's been going around, is what a person who was born in, was it 1920 or 1914? Have any of you seen those? They're very, very interesting, and Mike says he has. And it tells you what they went through from childhood until like when they
50,
were in
50,
their
50s or something.
80s or 70s.
Yeah, whatever.
And it was amazing how many trials, world trials,
Yeah.
you know, and this is kind of one of the first world trials that we've been through. And especially even in my daughters, our younger generations, absolutely. But it's interesting how will this help develop us as people? And maybe some of us have not been as touched by it as others, but we can learn lessons through this painful trial that the whole world is going through. And I think that there's an aspect of that as our children are getting older, that we're able to kind of capitalize on that and help teach through that. But those have been very enlightening to see. And, you know, they always say the greatest generation, there's very few of the greatest generation still alive. And there's a reason they're called that. And it's because of what they endured through their history and their timeline of history. And many of those things were great trials of the world. It wasn't just in their own lives, but it was in the lives of, you know, hundreds and thousands and millions of people. But they call them one of the greatest generations. And I always think it's sad when they say, yeah, we've lost one of our last of the greatest generation. I'm thinking, don't we have more? You know, what makes them consider that?
Ashley, did you have a question? I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to see if you have any suggestions on practicals for disciplining. We have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, so this is more so for the 3-year-old. But just like with timeouts, it seems he goes to timeout for pretty much the same few things over and over again. More like being too rough with his little sister or just not listening to us. And we try to give him a warning before he goes to timeout. We try and he has to tell us after timeout why he was there. And then we try to explain to him why, like, you know, why he can't be doing the things that he's doing. We try to make sure that he knows that we love him afterwards. But just any other suggestions for disciplining a 3-year-old?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think it might be helpful for us to remember the history of where time came from. It was an approach to deal with, quite frankly, some abuses with physical discipline. You know, people were beating their kids or, you know, using their kids physically. And so this approach came about as a way to discipline our children without having any physical harm to them. Fair, that's fine. I guess the question always is, does it work? You know, what discipline works? And if it's not working, and you can best decide that, I think you might want to find out, is there another approach that would work for him? Again, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. I mean, that is the basic fundamental description of discipline. And God uses that to talk to us as adults. And I think sometimes as adults, we always are trying to find a way to get disciplined by God in a way that's not painful. I go, fair enough. Nobody likes pain. I think sometimes with our children, especially as our kids have been exposed to an approach for quite a while, they kind of know how this works. You know, we go to the corner, we stay, we be quiet, and we whatever. And at some point, it's not going to work because it's no longer painful. So I would suggest to you, as you guys talk among yourselves, is when you notice, as you notice about your child, is this working? Is it still getting a result? Not just yes, mommy, no, daddy, but really, is it helping him change as a little? Now he's a little boy. I'm not going to expect him to act like a 12-year-old in a good way, but the same that wouldn't be fair. Okay, that would be what it's talking about in Ephesians chapter 6 about fathers, don't embitter your children, don't anger them, because you're expecting things out of them that's not realistic. That's a great way to embitter your child. You know, come on, Dad, you're just making it too difficult. However, I do think this question is always, is it bringing about change? And so, I don't know, I guess my answer to you would be, are there other things? Are there other things that get his attention? Maybe.
He certainly, I mean, we do spank him.
Okay.
So like, step one is timeout. If he doesn't behave appropriately there, he'll usually get a few warnings. And then of course it's upstairs to get a spanking.
Okay. Does that work? Does that work?
Yeah, for the I mean, he's 3. His memory is very short.
That's
but
true.
of course he recognizes the severity of the situation, and he certainly wants no parts of it when that's about to be the byproduct of his actions. But I think it's just more of like, we're kind of vetting and being curious if there's any other practicals, prior to that spanking that might work better than the timeout of of a preemptive approach to before we have to become physical every time.
Well, I think, well, maybe another, you're right. Maybe another approach would be, timeout is taking away their freedom. You're confining them to something. That's what you're taking away is the freedom. Maybe there's something else you can take away from them. Or an opportunity. Because timeout is a confinement, is what it is. You're taking away. So that same approach might be effective if you could think of something else you could take away that he would like.
Okay.
What could be? Sure, go ahead.
I get what you guys are saying, and it is difficult.
Yes, it is.
And I think it requires a lot of perseverance. And I know you're probably like,
Thanks a lot.
It's like a workout, really. It's like and you both look like you work out. So, but it's like a workout where you get to where some weight levels are easy, whereas for me, it's like over the top. And I think you have to decide how much weight do you put on for him to exercise his delayed response or his obedience, how quickly he will obey, what's it going to take? And because it will be, in some ways, it's the training. The discipline is the training. And, but I have seen our daughters, whenever we go and visit, one of the first things we talk about, they'll say, Mom, this is not working. What do you think? And I'm like, oh, great. This is, I've been there, I've done that, I've seen it, and I've not always felt like it was effective, okay? But I do know that consistency and where and consistency for you guys may be persevering. You may be just right around the corner from the victory, but you got to persevere and don't give up. And it may be that, okay, the timeouts, some children who throw temper tantrums, one of the things that I had to do with one of our daughters is hold her. And it was hard physically because she was so strong, but I would just hold her until that let down. And that's that little point where it's like they've let their will down. Their will is letting down. And sometimes there were no words. And sometimes the discipline was what hurt the most for one of our daughters was separating her so she couldn't talk. And that was like torture for her. And she would be so quick to say, I give up, because that was the heart of what it was. She just wanted to talk her way out of any problem. And to just separate her and say, no more words, you can't talk.
Do you find that your son is defiant? Is he ever defiant during these times when you're trying to discipline him?
Yes, sometimes. I feel like it's more for me than him.
Okay, there you go.
He usually listens better to Adrian.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's true because your husband's response was, really? I didn't see that. So, but I think that's a great point. I do think with our children, sometimes one of the parents has the more difficult time of disciplining them. Not because you're not up to it. It's just that the child doesn't respond to the one parent better as well as they should to the other parent. And so, bro, in this situation with your son, Not that you have to be the bad cop all the time and your wife's the good cop, but it may be that, especially as a young boy, he is gonna respond more to you or better to you. And what you could do is help him to learn to respond to his mom. Your mom is your mom. And if I'm not here, what she says goes, young man. And if you're not listening to her, that's another problem to talk about. So there's sometimes the dynamic between child and parent that the other parent, if you're not a single parent, you have another parent to help, you need to step in and say, hey, this is how this is going to go. And, so I don't know. I just think that it's important that it's interesting that you said that, sis, because sometimes that does happen. With our girls, sometimes I was the more effective discipliner, and sometimes Teresa was the more effective discipliner. Sometimes we played tag team, but it was something just to watch, observe which one was able to influence the child's behavior more than the other. And that's not.
Yeah, it's going to change.
It's going to change, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
You're
James
welcome.
Dobson writes some excellent things about discipline. And gosh, he's been around forever. And his books were some of the first books we read about parenting. They were very, very helpful.
Very helpful.
And
What was his name?
James Dobson.
Okay.
Very biblical, spiritual in his perspective on children. He just has a real inroad in this kind of thing. And Melissa gave me a couple of other names of books that we might want to mention. Raising an Emotionally Healthy Child by John Gottman, PhD. And The Wonder Years is one that was put out by DPI for a long time by Elizabeth Thompson. And Shepherding Your Child's Heart is an excellent book. It's by Todd Tripp. The Quiver by Douglas Jacoby. These are just good, in your library always. Good reference books to keep. And a lot of times we talk to other people, just trying to be open and, talking through some things. And that was very helpful. Doing a lot of reading, educating ourselves on those different topics was very, very helpful. We still do that, even with our grandchildren. We'll get a book that we feel like, I think this will help, our kids know how to help their children more.
There's a book that I read when my boys were little called Wild Things. And it's an amazing book. I can't remember the author. I'll try to find it and send it out. But it was just, it's a lot of those times where you're scratching your head and you're like, why did they do that? And it explains a little bit about just what's going on in little boys and kind of how to address those things, and a lot of really common sense things about dealing with things now when they're in a safe environment, so that you don't want to deal with certain things when they're out of your house and out of your ability to help them. And so it's building character and really helping your children when they're little. But it's one of my favorite. I loved it. And it's funny. There's some hilarious stories. There was a story about a mom who she walked in and her son was completely green. And in the book it says all the way down to his weenie, like just completely green with his sister's nail polish. And she's like, what were you thinking? Like, what? And he goes, I was trying to be the Hulk. Like, how many times do you look at your kids and you're like, oh, Anthony got it up. It's Wild Things, The Art of Nurturing Boys.
Yes. That sounds
by
awesome.
Stephen James and David Thomas. It looks like, I don't know if you can see kind of hard to, can't really see it on my thing, but.
Well, and you bring up a good point, sis. There's some other books out there that are geared towards raising boys. I think there's another one. Yeah. And there's also ones that are how to raise strong how to raise strong character girls. I mean, so there's some of these books that
Very
are
good.
focused on the sex of the child
Yeah.
that are very helpful because they are different
Yeah.
and different approaches work. And, I probably feel the same way as that mom with some of our daughters. What in the flat earth were you thinking? Well, she was being a girl. Okay, Teresa, take it away. I don't know. But it's important to get books like that because it does help you realize your boy is unique. Your daughter is unique. You can't always do them the same way. And that's great. Great example. And there's some other
Thank
good
you,
books like
Jennifer.
that too.
That's great.
Yeah.
Crystal, you had a question?
I do. I can make it quick. I'm not sure if you have heard of the fruit snack challenge. This is like one of those social media trends where you basically tempt your child with their favorite snack and see.
Oh, yeah. Like the marshmallow test.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So
I'm familiar with the marshmallow test. Yeah.
We just saw 2 videos of our two different grandchildren today.
Yeah, one passed and one failed.
okay, so my child failed. Like I didn't even turn my back. She had a fruit snack in her mouth. And then when I would, went in the hall and I was like, "Are you eating fruit snacks?" She was just like, "No." And then
How old is she?
She is 2. She'll be 3 August 1st.
Oh.
So I kind of expected her to fail because of her personality, but I was a little shocked at the lie and the rolling the eyes at the end. And I guess I was just wondering, when you observe things in your child's character at this age, basically how concerned should you be? What kind of things, I don't know, how do you then begin to make sure you're focused on truth telling or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Kind of like Larian
was teenager behavior. I was kind of shocked.
Well, I mean, I want to get back to a comment that Teresa made earlier. And I know this is one of these statements that's easier made than done. But I do think sometimes because we are so inundated with so much information, we have so many sources, and we have so many abilities to learn, it can sometimes be a little too much in the sense that everything becomes a crisis, or everything is, oh my gosh, if I don't get this dealt with by the age of 3, they're destined to be a whatever, deviant or something. And I think at this age, my opinion, looking back at our children and watching other parents' children, watching now our grandchildren, I think there's 2 things I would say. It's very important to note the character, duly noted. I see something in my child we need to address. Now, getting back to a comment that was made earlier by one of the couples, they're 3, okay? How much of this are they going to be able to grasp? Let's be fair, okay? I think this gets back again to what it's talking about in Ephesians chapter 6 about not embittering your children. You can have such expectations on your child that they're just frustrated with you, So I guess what I would do, sis, is I would note those things and then really work on making sure you've got, and I'm sure you probably do, but you have the relationship with that child and you keep developing that relationship with that child so you can keep influencing at that level. Not just the action level, but the heart level, the character level. And, I would say even at this point, it'd be fun to kind of joke about saying, honey, I know you have a tendency not to want to tell the truth, or what was that eye roll all about? I mean, address these things, but it doesn't have to be heavy-handed when the child is 2 or 3. But I think it's true. I think it's important to address them. It's important to note what they are, kind of like in a negative way, kind of like what Mary did with Jesus when it says she treasured these things in her heart. Duly noted, it became a part of her heart. She noted those things about her son. Now, if you remember that context, he had been gone away from the family for 3 days. Okay. It's like she could have been really freaked out about what kind of, what they did. They said that they were upset with him. Where were you? But when he answered her, it says that she treasured those, she noted it and she treasured those things in her heart. I think it's important that as parents, we do that. We make notes of our children's character We treasure them in our heart. In other words, they're important to us, and we just remember them. So I don't know. I don't think it's necessary that you want to keep hammering these little kids. I think you should address it in a way that they'll listen to you and talk to you about it.
Thank you.
That's my thought.
My Nicholas, I hope he's here, so hopefully, but he lied a lot when he was younger. And one of the things, one of my friends gave me this advice that really helped. You know, when you ask them, did you do this? Or you ask them that question, it's that you say, okay, I don't want you to answer me right now. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it first.
Good.
And that's really helpful, because I noticed for him, and I tried to look at why he lied. You know, for him, he lied a lot so that people would like him. He would tell people things because he wanted them to like him, or he wanted to be able to relate to them. He really wanted our approval a lot of the time, so he didn't want to get in trouble. I mean, I would ask him, you know, very nonchalantly something, and he wouldn't have gotten in trouble for, and he would lie about it. So giving him that chance to think about it before he told me, because it was just very easy for him to tell me what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So that helped.
That's a very good point, but I think that's also a very good example of what we're talking about tonight. And that is that you learn, you get to know your child, and you figure out what it is that motivates them and why they do what they do. So yeah, I appreciate that. It wasn't just a matter of he was doing the wrong thing. You were trying to dig into his character and figure it out more. And that was excellent advice. I totally agree with that. But I also agree with maybe even the bigger picture of, you know, not just they're doing something wrong, but why are they doing that? And then finding out what the answer to that is, and then addressing that in maybe a separate discussion or a separate teaching time. But very good. Yeah, very good.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing and answering all these questions. And I'm sure for some of the parents, you're starting to think of more and more questions to ask. That's usually what happens. So I was actually going to ask Greg and Theresa if you guys wouldn't mind putting your email address in the chat so that people have that if they wanted to maybe reach out to you guys with a specific question. And then that way they have a point of contact for you guys.
Absolutely. Maybe we could even spend some time on the phone. Sometimes it's harder to communicate, you know, via email, but absolutely, we'll make ourselves available and see if we can help. And, you know, we've enjoyed this. Maybe we can do this again in another format, another time, but I definitely don't want the fact that we have to deal with this virus to be a reason we can't be with each other. Yeah. I mean, that's true for all of us. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, amen. Well, thank you guys so much for that lesson tonight and answering their questions. And I was hoping maybe we could close out with a prayer. And Adrian, would you mind praying for us?
Sure will. God, thank you so much for bringing us here tonight. I appreciate the Jacksons so much just for having such a great message on their heart. God, I know that they've got experience, Father, that we will never have. And, you know, it's so refreshing to be able to learn from people who have not only, you know, had the opportunity to raise their children within the kingdom, but also help so many other couples through this journey. You know, parenting is something that's extremely scary. It's intimidating, and every day it brings new challenges to us. God, you know, I personally try so hard just to cling to you in moments of not being able to understand what to do or what to say, but to really have guidance from other brothers and sisters from all over the world. It's comforting.
Amen.
God, I pray so much that we would just be able to take these lessons tonight and really just be able to practically put them into the lives of, you know, ourselves, our spouses, and specifically our children. The ever ringing tone seems to be that the answer to a lot of these issues is very personal. It's something that we've got to really draw out of each and every child that we've got, you know, brother or sister, It doesn't matter necessarily the age, but we've really got to be able to spend the time and create that quality relationship with them as individuals to really understand how to really put the scriptures to practice. Because it seems like it's just so very different depending on not just individuals, but even circumstances. And God, I pray so much that we would just be able to do our best to stay close as a group. I know that it's going to help us as a couple, even just being able to rely and having conversations like this about, you know, things that are going on with our children, things that are going on with our relationship with the brothers and sisters that are present here, because at this time in life, this is who we can relate to the most. God, I'm so grateful again for this time, and I pray that everyone would be encouraged through it, and that Greg and Theresa know how much we love them and we appreciate their time. We say these things in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.